one of the phrases that I wasn't familiar with until we started making films about this topic was hypergamy. I didn't really know what it meant. I had to look it up. But also it tends to be used as a kind of catch-all conspiracy theory by a lot of the guys sort of in the more MGTOW, MRA type area. Hypergamy meaning that a woman will always look for a mate who's above her in status, and it's used as you can never be certain with a woman because she will always look for someone.
She's always looking elsewhere.
Yeah, she's always looking elsewhere, and she can't help it. It's in her nature, and men, you have to be aware of this. What do you make of that as an evolutionary biologist?
Yeah, there are things that men and women do that are evolutionary and not symmetrical, and not universal, but still sex-specific. And hypergamy, while not a super common term in the literature, is a term that emerges from the evolutionary literature, and it does touch on a reality, which is that throughout most of human prehistory and recorded history as well, precisely because of the sexual power that a young, specifically through much of history, a young, very young, unmarried woman had, she, for a very brief moment in time, had a chance to increase her lot in life greatly. And at some point, that window was going to close. And so she and maybe her parents, maybe her extended family, depending on the type of society that she was in, were looking for the absolutely best bet. And so how might that manifest in a modern sort of mating and dating scheme? A young woman who is well aware of her own sexuality and that she's in her prime, and who every time she walks out the door has eyes on her, which frankly, young women just have eyes on them all the time. It's hard not to know how much the world is looking at you. Even if you're not exposing yourself, just if you are of a certain age, and like I said, it all fit sort of the beauty norms for your culture. Are women going to be aware of those eyes and potentially looking for an improvement in their lot? Perhaps. What's the counterpoint? And it's not symmetrical, and it's not a mirror image, because male and female are not mirror images of one another at all. Well, the counterpoint, I would say, is the trope from literature and from reality and from everything in between, that women, upon having raised a man's children to some level of independence, will find themselves without a family as he goes and finds the next newest nubile 20-year-old, right? That men stick around through, for a relationship until they now have the kind of power that, men's power grows over time, and women's sexual power anyway tends to decrease over time. So at the point that those lines kind of cross, men are much more likely to overturn relationships and find someone else who looks like their wife did 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So are both of those things true? Do they happen? They do. Is it everyone? No. Is it a risk? Yes. Does it warrant the idea that this is what all women do? No. Are all men going to consider or actually abandon their wives at the point that they aren't hot young things anymore? No, they're not. And most men don't. Just like most men don't behave that way, most women don't behave that way either.
Something that just came up when I'm thinking about these sort of two perspectives is, in both of those perspectives, the other sex is seen as the enemy in some sense.
And in fact, we should be collaborative. And we are. I mean, we are when it works. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, yeah, I was going to say, in both these perspectives, there's sort of an implicit or explicit assumption. It's certainly implicit in a lot of sort of feminist theory. Like if you picked apart the Kathy Newman interview, as I've seen some people do, there's an implicit assumption in a lot of her questions that men and women are pitted against each other.
Right.
And If you go on to sort of the more extreme ends of the male-dominated manosphere, there's this explicit
Yeah, well,
women
MGTOW.
will
Yeah.
MGTOW, that
Yeah, that's what-
women are that our interests are not aligned. They're essentially so different that we can't even exist together.
Right.
What do you
Which
make
is,
of that?
it seems nuts to me. And in fact, if we are thinking explicitly evolutionarily, what we have in our past, as what most long-lived social living primates have, are two hierarchies within any group. And there's a male hierarchy and there's a female hierarchy. And it's confusing now when men and women are both doing, work together that isn't inherently gendered. And so that has confused a lot of what people think they know about how it is that we're supposed to be interacting with one another. And the fact that in some workplaces, the fact that actual sex can come into, like the prospect of sexual relationships comes into workplaces is also very confusing. But overall, women are much more likely to be competitive with other women and men with other men than men with women. That men and women tend to have interests, be they sexual or not. And I think, in fact, this is a bit off topic, but as a happily married person myself, it's just easier. It's far easier to walk into relationships with new men. Like, okay, I know that whatever we're doing, we don't have to wonder, like, is it this other thing? It's not. Like, you guys, like, you're here in my home with my husband, and like, you talk to him first. Like, that's where we are. That's not what we're doing. So we can have a relationship that hopefully is, a bit more like it might have been between two women or two men, but because we're not actually the same sex, maybe we can actually do it without the combative stuff, like more easily, maybe even, than two men could or two women could. Whereas we should expect that men are always sizing each other up to some degree, and women are always sizing each other up to some degree. But it should be a different, less fraught set of interactions between men and women in some regards.
You mentioned that we used to have hierarchies, male hierarchies and female hierarchies.
Yeah.
Is or are a lot of the problems that we're seeing at the moment, a lot of the difficulties, the result of bringing those hierarchies together?
Yeah.
Could you explain?
Yeah. No. This is, I wouldn't go back. And I've talked with some very earnest, actually young people. It's like, can we just go back to the traditional roles? I was like, God, no. Like, I would certainly love for us to once again celebrate full-time motherhood, if that's your choice, which many young women seem to not imagine that that's even on offer for them. But it would never have been what I would have wanted. And the idea that we should go back to a world that is prescribed in that way, that is circumscribed for women in the domestic sphere, sounds confining at best. So I'm extraordinarily grateful, and that's very new. But it came with a lot of chaos. It came with a lot of destruction of sort of an understanding of, okay, there are men's spheres and women's spheres weren't entirely domestic. There was plenty of empowerment. But having men and women do mostly separate work kept relations between the genders much simpler, I think. And so this is an unexpected effect of maybe first wave, second wave feminism. Most of the effects for which I'm grateful, this is a mess, and it's not clear how to carefully get out of it, although it is clear that those extremes on both sides are not the right way, wherein you demonize an entire population and try to get them to subjugate themselves to you and your whims, or else you're going to keep yelling at them. That's not going to help.
Heather, thank you very much.
Thank you, David.